All right. Good morning, folks. Good afternoon here on the East Coast, and welcome to the third Conservation Finance Learning Lab. This one, the art and science of borrowing money, bridge loans, and state revolving funds. For folks who have joined us for some of the other sessions, you already know, this 5-part series is meant to cover timely topics with accessible, actionable information and insight for practitioners, including public funding today, the use of debt, next month, corporate partnerships, and then the cherry on top of the sundae, the Dolphin Tank Project Workshop. I'm Lee Welpton, Executive Director of the Conservation Finance Network, whose fundamental business model is to expand people's capacity, connections, and confidence in using conservation finance strategies and approaches in their work. We attempt to bridge sectors and help people find the capital that they need to advance the pace and scale of their efforts. Power of being a network, for folks who've heard me say this before, is our ability to bring practitioners together beyond individual mission statements or investment strategies, really to align energy and innovation on what matters most. So that's a little of what we're here to do today, and also ongoing. I want to share a generous thank you with Jackie, Jody, Tara, and the whole Highstead team. They have been one of our closest partners over the years, and not just in this webinar series today, but also in our content partnership with the Center for Business and the Environment at Yale. So thank you again to Highstead. Hope you all find this session quite impactful. And who knows, maybe we can justify a third year next year. Lastly, I'll share a word of thanks with my colleagues, Jackson Moeller, CFN's Chief Investigator and Project Coach, Julia Mettler-Grove, our Project and Operations Maven, and newcomer Mary Powers, our Forest Finance Associate. Also, many of you represent partners, colleagues, and friends joining us today. I guess that wasn't the last thing. Two last things. One, that we are currently hiring for an associate director position to join our leadership team and to help coach project development across the country. So if that sounds like you, please let us know. We'd love to meet you or hear from you or discuss. Happy Valentine's Day, I should say. We chose today as the deadline for the Conservation Finance Bootcamp, our 17th annual. So if you're interested in taking a week-long deep dive into all manner of conservation funding and financing strategies, that course will be held this June 5th to 9th at the Yale School of Environment. And I think if I mention it, there will magically appear a link to the 2023 course landing page in the chat. All right, Jackie, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Great. Thanks for that introduction, Lee. Hi, everyone. My name is Jackie Wrigley. I'm a conservation finance specialist with Highstead. Thanks all for taking the time to be here and hear from our panelists today. So I want to tell you a little bit about Highstead. We're a private operating foundation based in Connecticut and working all around New England and beyond with our partners. Highstead is dedicated to increasing the pace of land protection and advancing the stewardship of natural spaces as well. And I did want to mention, if you missed the first 2 sessions of the Learning Lab on federal funding and carbon markets, there are recordings available on Highstead's website, and event recaps have also been written and posted on the Conservation Finance Network website. And I'll share the links to both of those in the chat in case you'd like to catch up on that. And then I'd also like to thank some people who have been working behind the scenes for today. I want to thank our panelists for being here and sharing their knowledge, as well as my team at Highstead and the CFN team for their continued support and collaboration. And my final thank you goes to my co-host, Lee Welpton. Lee and her team have been great partners and leaders in the conservation finance space. And now I'd like to hand it back to Lee for some housekeeping.
All right, so folks should know the drill by now. Use the chat for all questions. This session is being recorded, so you can share it with colleagues afterwards. And if you want a little bit more background on any of our speakers, pictured here, stage left, you can find those available on the website. I will say we are joined today by trail guide and guru Reggie Hall with Legacy Works Group, Kristen DeBoer, Executive Director and Borrower Extraordinaire with Kestrel Land Trust, and T. Thomas, an absolute font of wisdom on all things state revolving funds and Vice President with Quantified Ventures. So for today, we're really going to touch on the benefits and sources of both short-term and long-term debt we want to delve into the mechanics of how you think about financing transactions and also learn about the ins and outs of how that bridge financing works, including the perspective of Kristen, our land trust borrower. Then we'll explore clean water state revolving funds, a source of long-term public financing, including some, let's say, du jour opportunities and how to think about whether that's a context or a contact that you should seriously consider making in your state. I'll just also add a little context as we jump in. We've been thinking about these topics for a very long time. We worked with Reggie and the Conservation Fund and also the Land Trust Alliance all the way back in 2013 now, so a nice decade ago, on a survey to better understand why more conservation organizations and land trusts don't think about leveraging their resources and keeping their powder dry by borrowing money. And I'll grossly oversimplify some of the findings that we got back in the day. We found that most folks weren't familiar with how to do so effectively, lacked organizational support, or had risk-averse boards who were not inclined to think a nonprofit should take on debt, despite the fact that we all use debt in every facet of our daily lives. We also learned that most groups tend to borrow by the seat of their pants when there's some kind of an urgent, timely need and few other options remaining on the table, as opposed to thinking about borrowing as a strategy to prepare your organization for and to keep in the toolbox. So today we're really leaning on Reggie and Kristen to try and help us think a little more proactively about the role of debt and debt finance in our projects. Flipping over for T and state revolving funds. So, the way these are often described is a form of state infrastructure bank. And for those who have done some preliminary investigation into state revolving funds and relevance for your context, this has been a hot but often not well understood topic among conservation finance practitioners, with very recently a heck of a lot of anticipation about the, T will correct me if I'm wrong, nearly 12 billion additional funds allocated through the bipartisan, I'm getting a more, so by Price is Right rules, maybe I was okay. $44 billion in new funds allocated through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, though T can tell us about whether those funds are real or perhaps partly clawed back or anything of the context that's happening there. So I'll hit the pause button on myself there and turn things over to our experts and speakers. And it is my pleasure to kick things off with Reggie. So take it away, Reg.
Thanks, Lee. Let me share my screen here and get going. I would be remiss to not thank you all for joining us here on Valentine's Day. As you will learn, we are all pretty sweet on debt and using loans and bridge financing to accelerate the pace and accomplish our goals. So I'm Reggie Hall, Director of Conservation Finance with Legacy Works Group. Who is Legacy Works Group? It's actually two different entities united under Legacy Works Group. It's a nonprofit entity as well as a for-profit entity. And we, or rather I am spending time between the two working on our impact finance work, and specifically working with individuals, family offices, and foundations to create a national network of local and regional revolving funds to facilitate and accelerate the pace of local conservation around the U.S. And really working hard to get quote unquote investors to think about local conservation as an asset class in their portfolio. So that's a little bit about us and me. So first and foremost, what is bridge financing? I'm going to be mentioning that quite a bit. And bridge financing is, I like to think about it, is usually temporary or short-term loans to bridge a kind of a finite time or funding gap. usually reasonable assured that that funding is coming through. So it's more of a question of when the funding is coming as opposed to if the funding is coming for a project. Seeing a lot of reimbursement style grants being issued to land trust and other conservation organizations around the country. So sometimes it's bridging the cash flow of those reimbursement grants. So certainly the funding is there, and it's assured that it's there. You just gotta spend the money to then fill out the paperwork and seek reimbursement. Other times bridging capital campaigns, multi-year pledges and that sort of thing. But bridge financing, bridge loans, usually short term, a few months to a few years, not really getting into that spectrum of long-term, multi-year or decade financing. So why borrow money? First and foremost, helping to enhance your organization's or your entity's pounce factor, your ability to avail yourself of an opportunity. Maybe it's an acquisition, maybe it's something else, but effectively acting in a timely manner, keeping on track and pace with market forces that may be in your operating region, what have you. Along those lines, and kind of going with the pounce factor, is accelerating outcomes. Maybe it's that reimbursement grant that I referenced earlier. Not all organizations have the liquidity to churn through their reimbursement grants as quickly as they would like. Maybe it's during a construction season for trail work. Maybe it's planting trees or wetlands restoration, those sorts of outcomes. So by borrowing money, tapping in and leveraging other people's money to help you achieve your goals, you might be able to accelerate those outcomes. Also, keeping your own money, as we say in the business, powder dry. Keeping your own money liquid in the account, earning interest, what have you. So just shrewd money management and maintaining your own internal opportunity costs, keeping those, keeping that money available. Leveraging limited resources and also growing internal expertise. There's nothing like on-the-job experiential learning for organizational staff. Borrowing money can be a transformative and, quite frankly, catalytic event for an organization and also for staff expertise development. Improving your reputation in the community for the organization. Nothing says, good housekeeping stamp of seal of approval, this organization is financially sound by qualifying for a loan, going out, using that money, repaying it in a timely manner. That really enhances reputation, and also it's an opportunity to tell your organization story. And then finally, fundraising and donor cultivation opportunities abound throughout the borrowing money process. Moving on, as organizations contemplate which lender or which type of lender to work with, certainly this is not exhaustive, but just some suggested questions. For a lot of conservation work, we're looking to acquire raw land, i.e. habitat or some other thing, some other interest. Maybe it's a conservation easement. Not all lenders will finance the acquisition, pre-acquisition of a conservation easement, or even raw land, or to bridge a reimbursement style grant, or whatever it is you're trying to borrow money for. So identify those lenders that are able to do that. Understanding their process, their fees, their timing in particular, as Lee alluded to in that survey we did a decade ago. Not waiting until the last minute, because if you do, you're going to severely limit the types of lenders you can work with, the number of lenders you might be able to borrow money from. So getting out ahead of the game, talking to a number of different ones, understanding their process, their timeline, and how that's going to fit in with your needs. Also, furthermore, different types of terms, and creating maybe a little matrix amongst the different lenders in your region or that are available to you. What are their collateral requirements? Do they use land as collateral? Do they need something else? And number 8 and number 9, I would say, are perhaps some of the two of the most important questions on the list. What happens if my organization can't repay the loan? And this gets to potentially or considering working with lenders that have some sort of mission alignment with your organization or your cause. And that really pays dividends down the road, especially if there's an issue during the life of the loan. They are more inclined probably to work with you, maybe even provide technical assistance to help your organization get out of the jam, maybe offer a loan extension, whatever the possibilities are. But do not underestimate the power of working with a mission-aligned lender. Also, interest rate. I put it there at the end because inevitably it's a very interesting graph if you plot it. Usually loans with low interest rates may be very hard to access as far as their application process, their timing, underwriting requirements. What I've observed out there in the field is that usually low cost capital has some of the hardest or biggest hurdles to get through in order to access that money. So just a thing to consider. Let's see, winding down here with my portion of the presentation, questions that we as lenders are going to ask you. How much do you need? When do you need it? For how long? Pretty basic stuff. What's your repayment strategy? And it just gets to, especially as nonprofits, thinking like a business, not just, oh, we're going to fundraise, but talk about your capital campaign, talk about your track record of securing certain grants from state or federal partners. Think about number 5 there. What do you have for collateral? Is it appropriate for you to use the conservation asset that you are trying to acquire? Can you use that as collateral? Are there other things, assets of supporters or other things that you have that are of value that could be used as collateral and secure a loan? Finally, best practices, and Kristen and Kestrel Land Trust are going to highlight these with their success story. Communicate early and often with your lender. Whether it's early on in the process, later on in the process, don't be shy, overwhelm us with communication. It is never a bad thing. Number 2, ask for help. A lot of lenders out there, particularly in the conservation space, particularly those that have mission alignment, provide technical assistance, which may be really beneficial for your organization if this is your first time borrowing money, working with a bank or a foundation or some other entity that's providing the loans. Number 3, I alluded to it earlier, think like a business. What's your business plan for the project? And particularly if you're working with a traditional financial institution, be ready to show how you're going to repay the loan and have not only your plan A for repayment, but also plans B, C, and D, and maybe even a plan E. For what happens when things might not go according to plan. Tell us a story. It is, certainly back to the business side of things, we're going to acquire this property. Here's how we're going to repay it. But especially for those mission aligned lenders, love to hear stories. This project, our organization has been waiting for this project to come along for more than a decade. It's going to be transformative. It's going to be the new public park or community garden or whatever the outcome's going to be. Tell a story. We really love to hear those, and it engages us to help you. Thank us. It's file this one under the file of common sense, can be cutting edge, but thank us. We really appreciate mentions in newspapers and articles and press and that sort of thing, but also a thank you note is really appreciated. And number 6, see number 1, communicate early and often, but keep, once the loan has closed, we're in the loan term, keep your lender updated on progress or lack thereof. C number 2, ask for help. If things aren't going according to plan, do not be afraid to engage with your lender. Let them know. They may be able to help you get out of a bind. So with that, I will conclude my portion of the session and stop sharing and tee it up for Kristen.
Thanks, Reg. And before we jump into Kristen's, I'll take the moderator privilege here and just ask, what's the kind of number one gold star and number one red flag you typically have seen when you get loan applications through?
Oh my. I would say, and I think I share this with my colleagues and friends in the foundation world. It's never good when the numbers in your proposed project budgets don't add up. It raises a lot of questions for us as you're asking us to either lend or invest in your work. So certainly make sure your numbers add up. But then also along those lines, along with the budgets, come to us with a full 360-degree view or picture of your budget. Projects are not just about acquisition dollars and what you need at the closing table. There's overhead, there's staff time, there's stewardship and or restoration. You might not be asking us to fund or finance that, and you can point to which portion of it that you're funding, but it's really helpful for us to make sure that we understand that you're thinking of the whole thing, the whole picture, the whole body of work in this project that you're undertaking. So hope that makes sense, Lee.
It does. And we have a real quick one. Kristen, I'm sorry to keep belaboring your start here. Just a real quick clarification. Who can borrow? Feds, states, counties? Do they always need to be a private or a nonprofit partner to absorb the risk?
It really depends. It depends on the lender. And it also depends on the literally the ability of the quote unquote borrower. So in some instances with municipalities, counties, units of government, it seems to really boil down to their legal counsel. Some of those government entities can't borrow. Their legal counsel says, oh, we can't issue a quote unquote note of indebtedness, i.e. the county commissioners or whoever's got signatory authority can't sign the deed of trust or the mortgage for the loan to acquire tomorrow's park at today's price, because that binds the hands of future administrations. One thing, with Legacy Works, for instance, because we have the nonprofit and the for-profit, we can actually not only provide below market rate loans to nonprofit entities, because we're also for-profit, we can provide loans to conservation, mission-aligned private entities like a rancher, a farmer, somebody involved in aquaculture, what have you, so long as they're, some sort of conservation outcome. So really depends on the lender and their ability and appetite for what they're trying to provide.
Well, we can certainly keep digging in, but we want to give Kristen the main stage here. So we'll flip things over and keep it running. Kristen, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. We did this last year, and I do love loans. That's the theme for today, right? On the Valentine's Day that we're all celebrating. A lot of what you're going to hear has been said by Reggie, so there's a little bit of echo here, but that's because Reggie has been such a great partner to Kestrel Land Trust and has really trained us from the beginning. So is everyone seeing my screen, I hope? So what I want to share with you is how the act of borrowing money has changed Kestrel. I have had the privilege of serving as the executive director of this land trust for 17 years, and started earlier than that, even as a volunteer board member. So over the 20 years, we've grown from no staff to 12 staff. We've grown from, doing 80 acres to over 1,000 acres a year. So it's really changed us. And although not all of that is attributable to loans. It certainly has helped in lots of different ways, which I will share with you now. So my second slide, borrowing money builds courage. What do I mean by that? The idea of being able to act quickly, being able to respond to real estate markets, to pounce, as Reggie said, when a property that you've had your eyes on for years comes on the market suddenly, and the act of borrowing gives you the capacity, the courage to act quickly. And our example of that is in Hadley, Massachusetts. I did not mention where we are. Of course, we're in the heart of the Connecticut River Valley in Massachusetts, Western Mass. We work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to create the Fort River division of the Conti Refuge. And there was a property that came up for sale that would have been 4 McMansions. It was $1 million. It was, prime. The U.S. Fish couldn't act quickly enough, but with a loan from the Conservation Fund, we were able to buy it and flip it over to the feds within 1.5 years. So that really has changed the landscape, literally. I just walked there over the weekend with my husband and was telling him the story of how the trail we were walking on would have been filled with big houses, and it would not have been open to us or the 30,000 people who go there every year to enjoy the wildlife refuge. It also builds creativity. So Reggie talked about having different options for paying back the loan. I think that has instilled a level of creativity in planning for not just plan A, what your most desired outcome is, but plan B, plan C, even a plan D, and the worst case scenario, what happens if you can't raise the money or if your partner disappears for some unknown reason. So really developing not just the ideas, but the budgets behind each of those projects, whether it's a state park, a municipal park, whether it's a community farm, whether it's a conservation cemetery, whether you're working with a conservation buyer who might be able to buy the land and donate a CR back for a tax credit, whether it's having enough site control in owning the land that you can do a limited development to help pay for the rest. So those are all the kinds of creative options that we consider in some of our projects when we have to take out a loan. An example of that is on the Mount Holyoke Range in Western Mass, a key area for state resources. We were part of this landscape partnership grant and had to take a piece of property off the market, key piece again. We wanted it to be part of the state park. That wasn't possible. It ended up being a municipal park, and it worked out just as well. So thinking creatively is critical as we move forward to think about what kind of loans will be offerable to save a piece of land. Collaboration is key, bringing money to the table with partners that may not have the resources that we have because we have these conservation lenders. An example of this was collaborating with the Food Bank of Western Mass. There was a 150-acre farm that we had our eyes on for literally a decade. The landowner wanted millions. There was a long time in talking with that landowner to get him to accept appraised value. But really, during the course of that decade, his health declined and the urgent need to buy the land became apparent. So with it was 175 acres, we had the control to divide it into 3 parts. One was to collaborate with the food bank and get them a new farm where they're serving people in need to provide local food. Another one was to work with a local dairy farm that wanted a house and a little bit more land to enhance their operation. And then the third was the town of Amherst, which was a partner in creating a new conservation area that was dedicated to the landowner that we were working with. So really bringing the money to the table created that context for collaboration that wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't have purchased the land in advance and been the one to orchestrate the division for three different very good conservation purposes. A fourth value that is brought to our organization as of borrowing money is really creating capacity. Reggie mentioned earlier, thinking like a business, building in all costs, and that has been a huge factor in our growth. Really thinking, we started thinking as a volunteer land trust, really not very sophisticated, honestly, not thinking about all of the costs involved with doing a land transaction successfully. I can remember, the first budgets were 2 lines, acquisition and appraisal. Nothing else counted or mattered, apparently. So really just thinking about what are the stewardship costs, what are the project management costs, what is the value that staff bring to the table as a negotiator, putting together the deal. A cost of accounting, thinking about the financial costs, cost of attorneys, of course, baselines, all the things that go into a complex, sophisticated budget has really enhanced our capacity to not only hire new staff, but work with the professionals, contractors that make a project whole. An example of this is in Holyoke, Massachusetts. We had a project, was 14 acres urban forest adjacent to a city park. And one of our board members who lived in the city knew that we had recently gotten a bequest and thought, well, you have about just the right amount of money to buy that land outright. Why not just do that? And instead, we worked with the board member and the city to think about taking out a bridge loan instead and using that time to leverage a state grant and stateside LWCF that we would not have been able to do if we hadn't taken a bridge loan out. And what ended up happening is by building that budget in all of its complexity, we set the stage for an amazing revival of this particular urban park. And so now the city owns the land. We bought it for them. They bought it back from us. And they've been able to secure over $1 million more just to revive the urban park. So it really set the stage for a much more advanced financial planning for that area. Another example that I'll share with you, the last example, is borrowing money builds equity. And of course, we talk a lot about DEI. In this case, I'm talking about the financial equity. We used a loan to borrow to buy a house. And so this was part of a property on the Mount Holyoke Range. You can see the pond just beyond the deck there. A property that, our board really wasn't sure we wanted to begin with. The house came with the land. The town who created the conservation area didn't want the house, so we held on to it for some time. But we started to thinking about how it could build equity for the organization, not only in creating a wonderful place for our staff to work, but also to think of it as an asset over the long term. We all have been schooled in the need for long-term stewardship reserves and really building a robust balance sheet to ensure that we have the capacity over time to care for the lands that we have responsibility for. And so we've actually located a portion of our stewardship reserve in the value of the home, given that in 10, 20, 30, 50, 70 years ahead of time, if we don't need a place to work for 12 staff, maybe we've shrunk down to a few staff, we could always sell the house as an asset that would support the organization's long-term stewardship commitment. And so I think the mentality of using loans to build equity, just as individuals and families use loans to build their own equity personally, it's something that land trusts can also consider doing. So, overall, I think the concept of borrowing money was kind of scary to begin with. Over a decade ago, we've now done at least 6 loans, and we've moved into using our own assets to finance projects in a short period of time. So for example, we recently purchased land using Forest Legacy as our takeout. We have another property where we were able to act with a right of first refusal. And so that internal bridge loan that we've been able to build up through a campaign that we had has enabled us to act more quickly as well. And, we've now gotten to the point where if we don't have a loan out, we feel like we're not doing our best, and that really taking out the loans is as an expression to the community that we're committed, that we're willing to go the distance, and that we can have their backs in certain cases when they really want land to be conserved and not to be at the whims of the market. So I think all of what Reggie said has been true for Kestrel. It's built our courage, creativity, collaboration, our capacity, and our long-term equity. And we are grateful to the Conservation Fund and to Norcross Wildlife Sanctuary and to others that have even private individuals who have given loans. So it's really made a difference. And we're glad that we've gone down that path and we're here today. So
thank you, Chris.
Sharing. Yeah.
Thank you, Kristen. Before we switch gears here, you answered my question, which was going to be, how did your perception of risk change from your first to more current loans and borrowing? But since you answered that one so well, I'll pivot to how have you really managed the kind of community perception messaging on borrowing? I know it's something that people are a bit anxious about, thinking about borrowing and then fundraising. Well, it's already conserved. Why would people give? So how have you gotten ahead of some of those dynamics?
Yeah, well, I think we've focused on takeout plans that include a large portion of public funding. We have done private fundraising as well to augment to fill any gaps that are there. But I think transparency is the answer. It's just a real fact of how transactions happen, how real estate transactions can end up in a conservation outcome or a development outcome or somewhere in between, and the capacity of individuals and philanthropists to fill gaps and leverage public funding has made, I think it's been a case fairly easy to make. I'm not sure it's a big problem as long as we're transparent from the beginning.
Thanks. And then one just quick clarification before we move on from the chat. Have you had an issue with public funders not making the grant? I think this is in the context of knowing it's a loan, but maybe separately, has the public funding ever not come through?
Not so far. I think we've definitely gone to Plan A through Plan A, B, C, maybe down to C. We've never gotten to D or E or F, but we've definitely had preferred public partners say no, and so then we move on to a different agency or a different municipality. So I think the alternative plans are also embedded in those relationships, those partnerships that we've built over time. So, bringing that level of transparency to the transaction with our partners, I think is just as important. So for example, in this project that we recently did in the city of Holyoke, that was our first project in a city that is not accustomed to buying land for conservation. And so we just had to be really clear with them from the beginning what the full budget looked like, what the takeout plan looked like, what our expectations were, and how we can support them after they took on the land themselves. So I think communication from the get-go is the answer.
I'm going to take a risky position and let Reggie re-enter the chat. Go for it, Reg.
Thanks. Hey, real quick, I've seen government funders, not be a big fan of using loans to pre-acquire conservation easements, particularly working farmland conservation easements. Years ago, that might have been okay or acceptable to help meet the needs of the farmer that needs to move quickly. But now it is hard to find an agency partner willing to allow their grantee to pre-acquire a conservation easement.
Yes.
Good point, Reg.
We've developed some workarounds around that, but you're right, that has been a challenge.
Well, we can delve in a whole lot deeper in the kind of panel discussion, but I'm going to go ahead and flip things over now to T, moving from the world of shorter term bridge loans to a much different universe of longer term public finance. So T, take it away.
All right. Am I supposed to see my face on the entire screen? Is that what we're doing, Lee? All right.
Just until you share your slides.
Will I share my screen? All right.
Yes.
Well, hi, everyone. Excited to be here. I am the resident person to talk to you about what you need to know about the state revolving funds and how it relates to conservation finance. Before I begin, I love to preface these SRF conversations by saying that the real issue that we have around SRFs are like this weird double circle that just like proliferates itself. We have a very old, traditionally wastewater program with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund that's really well built. It's like a machine for municipal wastewater treatment facilities. But everyone on this call knows that it can finance almost anything that has a clean water nexus. So cattle fencing, like fish ladders, you name it, that's an eligible use of the Clean Water SRF. So you've got this like program here that has massive potential, but deeply worn grooves of municipal wastewater treatment. And then you've got on you all's side, the folks that may be interested in tapping into these funds, there's a lot of interest in accessing these funds because there's a lot of free money, and we'll talk about that, cheap loans. You can't beat the interest rate, you can't beat the terms. But they kind of, like what we do in the watershed and conservation group world is we kind of like sniff around the SRFs and we're like, ugh, that is definitely not built for me. So I'm not going to chalk the pipeline of the SRFs full of nature-based solutions, or we talk about natural infrastructure. So the SRFs don't see any projects coming to them, so they don't change their program accordingly. And the program's not changed accordingly because there are no projects. So everything that we're trying to do within my world, everything I think that that CFN and others that are on this call deeply believe is that there's a different, cooler, more innovative way that you can use these funds. And I think the idea that I want to leave you all with is it's at least worth the stroll down. Is this a possibility? So we're going to talk about how conservation finance meets up with the state revolving funds. So I'll begin with what are the SRFs. We are primarily going to be talking about the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. So if any of you have wastewater in the community that you live in, it is almost guaranteed that that wastewater was funded at some point through the Clean Water SRF program. So money comes in from EPA that is matched. I don't know what the state is. It's like Michigan, possibly. It's matched 20% by the state. That money is loaned out and then it's repaid back. So there's nothing magical about the SRF except the age. And there's so much repayment dollars built up that now a lot of those federal dollars, we can do what we call loan forgiveness. And we'll talk about all of that. So that kitty in the middle of this Clean Water SRF is massive, and it's getting massive-er as we go. And so trying to figure out how to navigate this world is really what we're talking about. So what can be funded? 94% is all wastewater, everything. So pipes, pumps, combined sewer overflows. If it's engineered and looks like concrete or steel for wastewater purposes, that is the bread and butter of this wastewater program. If you could put bread and butter and wastewater in the same sentence, that's what that is. The aperture is much larger. Stormwater, energy and water conservation, agriculture projects, resource extraction, abandoned mine land, cleaning up fracking water, which is pretty gross, contaminated site cleanup, which is a lot of money. A lot of our downtowns have legacy brownfields and Superfund sites. This massive category of habitat protection, wetlands, land conservation, dam removals. And then there's this even larger category of groundwater and surface water protection. So I almost double dog dare you to find a lot of the conservation work that we do that at least some component of the project doesn't have one of these connections. The exception to that might be things like bike trails. I haven't yet figured out how to make a water quality connection to bike trails. But again, sometimes we can pay for the land with SRF. We can pay for the bike trails with, somebody else's dollar. Just a minute on which SRF. I get a lot of calls and a lot of people that have gone way down the rabbit hole of the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund because they deeply care about source water protection. The irony is that you can't actually use the drinking water program to clean up or reserve or preserve or restore drinking water source protection. You can ironically only fund that out of the Clean Water SRF program. So there are very thin opportunities in the drinking water world. There are massive opportunities within the Clean Water SRF program. So I spend 99% of my time obsessing over the Clean Water SRF. There are people in my team that feel very strongly that the drinking water program is the cat's meow. I politely disagree with you, my friends. So what we will be talking about is the Clean Water program. Why should we care? That duck over there, that Scrooge McDuck, that is the pile of infrastructure bill dollars that every single one of our state SRFs are sitting on. And that pile is going to continue to grow over the next 5 years. And so understanding how to navigate and get access to that is the next generation of conservation finance. We like to say within our nerd world that we think that SRFs have the potential to be the largest impact investor on the planet. And that is not an understatement. The largest asset balance sheet, the best credit rating. And so we are obsessed with tapping into that sleepy grandpa revolving loan fund and then bringing that into this generation. So we should care for all of the reasons that the two previous presenters said. Flexible, 100% financing, no match. You can use it as match for your other federal programs, flexible repayments. We usually give you like a year deferred payment before you have to start paying on your loan. Fixed terms for up to 30 years. Sometimes there's free money associated with it. We're talking 1% money, fixed, set, 1 year deferred repayment. I feel like a used car salesman right now. There's all kinds of caveats, but to paint the opportunity, this is what we're talking about structuring. The bipartisan infrastructure law has dedicated billions. Almost 85% of the water money from the bipartisan infrastructure law is going through the SRFs. So there's a lot of money falling from the sky right now, but this one is really one that's worth paying attention to. Half of that money has to be free. So big opportunity and worth the time to at least hypothesize about whether this is a good opportunity to run after. And then a lot of state SRFs, even before the infrastructure law passed, were struggling to spend all of their money. I was the water finance director in Vermont. We were struggling to spend all of our money. We opened up our program to all through legislative overhaul, and we started doing business with all kinds of odd bedfellows, regenerative agriculture transitions, the trust for public land, some very small land trusts, super fund, lakes in crisis. So that untapped money is a massive opportunity for all of us. So that's the good thing. Again, only 4% of our dollars have ever touched this money. The 44 billion through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And then again, there's an opportunity for all of us collectively on this call to talk about our natural infrastructure as water infrastructure. So I frequently hear something along the lines of, gee, conservation finance sounds pretty cool, but we have massive demand for pipes and pumps. So golly gee, when we're done funding all these CSO tunnels, we'll be happy to do, birds and bunnies projects. That to me is a symptom of somebody doesn't get it, right? Either we're not talking about our projects like they are real grown-up infrastructure projects that attenuate water, that clean nutrients, that help meet, flooding and permit requirements. So where they're not talking about them right, or they're not being heard right. So the cheapest thing you can do, for example, for a CSO is you can suck up that water right where it lands. So you don't have to worry about overflowing raw sewage and stormwater, right? So those relationships to utilities and talking about shamelessly talking about natural infrastructure as infrastructure is like the George Jetson stuff. That's the job of all of us. So why don't SRFs bother to fund non-point source projects? Why isn't this already a thing? And I think, again, there are things like the program started as a point source, heavily engineered program. A lot of the programs are still run by engineers, even though they're financial programs. They see nothing from any of us on these calls. A couple of exploratory conversations, but applications with baked projects with the right nouns and verbs rarely make connection to the actual state SRF people. We talk around the SRFs, we complain about them, we do white papers, but that actual stuffing the pipeline rarely happens. There's no automatic built-in user base. Lee is not paying a monthly bill. She probably should. Lee, you should do that. But there's no monthly bill for Lee to have nature-based access, right? So as long as we don't have that, and we're not talking about our natural infrastructure as real big kid infrastructure, that's part of what we are all paying for when we want stormwater and when we want wastewater treatment and clean water access. That user base is a problem. It's something we need, it's an X we need to solve for. It's not unsolvable, or else Lee and Jackson wouldn't have a job in Conservation Finance Network. Reggie wouldn't have been around all these years talking about revolving loan funds. So it's not unsolvable. And then again, lack of understanding of natural infrastructure. This is non-point source is our acronym here. Again, gaps in our English to English translations. Capacity challenges at the state level to do project development. That's where I got at the state level. I did as much razzle dazzle as I could with adding 0 staff people to these initiatives. We did some fun stuff, but I couldn't put projects together. I couldn't come up with repayment and loan grant schemes, but I sure as heck would react if somebody tripped over my front door with a great project. So that's the opportunity for those of us that are on this call. So I was double dog dared to do more than talk the talk by Peter Stengel with the U.S. Endowment for Forests and Communities. And that double dog dare resulted in a big effort that we are getting off the ground called the SRF Watershed Coordinator. And essentially this is our disruptor. This is the person that will work directly with watershed groups to do pipeline review and help. This is within a geography, and I'll talk to you about the geographies, but a pipeline review of what's actually SRF fundable, like what looks like a real water infrastructure project that we think we can do our best to jam through this wastewater pipe program. So pipeline review and all the hand-holding needed to get those projects over the finish line. Like they speak the language, they know the acronyms, so that support is what our watershed coordinators will be doing. They're going to try to help solve for that repayment stream support. And then the third thing they're going to do is actually be that liaison for the states. Our state SRF programs are being slammed right now with massive demand. And like everyone's like, can I have my free money, please? And then they're like, adorable. I've gotten 45 of these emails today. And it's really, really hard for them to sift through what are real projects versus what Lee just was like, I don't know, let's just see if anything works, right? So our watershed coordinator, when we are talking to states, we're saying, when we call you, we have a real project for you. So serving as that liaison and speaking that language is what this work will do. So again, our objective is 1 FTE to support watershed and conservation groups. Why? Because at some point, the infrastructure money is going to go away. IRA will go away. And those of us that are like chain smoking by the dumpster after these 5 years pass, like we want to know, like, did we do anything to change the system that we complained about? And our vision is that we want the relationship between our water utilities and communities and our watershed and conservation groups to be completely different. Why? Through the SRFs? Because when all that money goes away, there will be cockroaches left and there will be the state revolving funds. So this is what we see as our opportunity to change this long term. These are the geographies that we have so far. I am so happy with this map. It's not big enough. We have already brought on a Chicago-based watershed coordinator and very quickly are moving towards these other states. So if you see a state here that more or less lines up with where you live, work, and breathe, call me if you want to have one of our watershed coordinators work with you. We're open for business. All right, Lee, I'm going to power through this, but SRF Basics 101. Okay, free money.
In like 3.5 minutes or less?
Oh my gosh. Okay, there's free money available.
We'll give you 4.
There's free money available in the SRF program. It's typically through loan forgiveness. The money depends on the state. Everything in SRF world depends on the state. But there is a chunk of money that's available. So we can kind of help you draw some of those lines. We have some resources for you at the end. Not going to go here. This is the process of walking through an SRF project. We will make sure you have these slides and try to give you some breadcrumbs. There's sort of what we call the advocacy window. So there's this magic moment where a state releases an intended use plan, and then a state closes that comment period. It's about 30 days. This is just an example from Ohio, but more or less different dates, but more or less a similar cycle. All the way at the other end is this raising your hand nomination form, ranking form that there really is the global us. This is our opportunity to get that visibility and get that pipeline. So when we talk with groups through training and all the weird things that we do, we put a heavy focus on that initial ranking form, and then additional focus on this opportunity to sort of comment to the state. Make your project visible. Find your municipal best friends. There are some states that you can go directly to the SRF. I can tell you who those are after my 4 minutes are up. You talk to your SRF staff early, often. Submit your ranking form. So get that project in front of the state so that they know that you're alive and that you all have amazing projects. I'm going to skip over this. We rank projects in the SRF. So it's important to pay attention to how projects are ranked. And then I'll just spend 1 minute on engaging with SRF staff. Early and often, they're not ogres, I promise. They want your projects in almost every state, with the exception of like 2 that I've talked to. I won't tell you who they are. Early and often, they want this to work if it can work in their state. Usually they want that to happen. So the quicker, the more frequent as you're developing your project, and the more developed your project is. Like the idea that Lee had yesterday is different than a project that has municipal buy-in, repayment stream, permitting in place, design if necessary. So that's another thing to think about. Understanding the best bang for your buck comments. We have seen like 50-page comment letters go to states. Good luck. What's the thing that you care about? Let's focus in on that, right? We could all do all of our jobs better, but really like what's the best bang for our buck to move our mission forward of conservation finance through piles of money that are reasonably cheap, not reasonably, very cheap for us to access. Better in numbers. So the more groups, the more voice. And I'll just say quickly, the Iowa SRF used to be all pipes and pumps when I started there 1.5 million years ago. The watershed and conservation groups got wind that any of these things were possible, maybe like before the internet or something. And they sort of made a big push at the state legislature, and they were like, are you kidding me? We have access. This is our money too. And that rewrote and forever changed the trajectory of the SRF program. So it wasn't me, it wasn't the state doing it because they felt like it, but it was you all that really were the change agents. So that's helpful. And then getting on the mailing list. So you can't participate if you don't know when the thing is and what the thing is. So figure out how to get on that list. Lee will send this out later. There are a couple of links here about reports and access to state plans and statute and more information than you ever wanted to know. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing, Lee.
And T, is there some kind of an academy if people wanted to learn more about state revolving funds?
Wow. Yeah, I actually think you can see a link in the chat. It might just be dropping just like right now.
Sorry, audience. That was really cheesy, but wanted to cue that up.
I would like to say we didn't practice that, but we did. Yes, we have worked a lot on the formation of what we call SRF Academy. And the goal of that is really to like democratize the information of the SRFs. So you don't have to call me every single time you have a weird SRF idea. So link is in the chat. Please feel free to reach out, even reach out I can't say no to a weird SRF idea. So whatever, just reach out either way. But yes, it's in the chat.
And T, how about any other kind of clearinghouse resource to learn about SRF across multiple states?
Yeah, so I think the links, Lee, and please do share that around. I think the Southwest Environmental Finance Center is like my Bible where I go for SRF stuff. And that is like, they have everything all in one spot. They have the intended use plans, the legislation, the priority ranking, annual reports. So they kind of have like a one-stop shop that if you need to try and get your flavor of what's happening, that's like a really good place to start.
University of New Mexico, right? Southwest Environmental Finance Center.
That's right. Region something. I don't know which region. Yeah.
And before we pull Kristen and Reg back in for kind of panel discussion, a couple quick things coming through the chat. FEMA's Storm Revolving Loan Fund in its infancy. Any quantified ventures insight into the future of that program for climate resilience projects like for forest, fire, shoreline?
Gosh, Kelly, it's like I planted you in the audience. So we are, I think, the only people working on FEMA Storm. So we are working with EDF and a number of states as they are doing enabling legislation. And our main priorities are to make sure that we are not just looking at putting houses on stilts and calling that pre-disaster mitigation, but they are in fact heavily focused both on under-resourced communities and natural infrastructure. So every state is doing this differently, but so far we have seen at least a large enough state aperture that they are including nature-based solutions in all of their offerings. So New York, New Jersey, Virginia, Louisiana, Florida are just kind of a handful of the states that are right now doing enabling legislation. So there is a notice of funding availability out there right now. So do also ping me on that because I know more than I ever wanted to know about FEMA Storm.
And last question coming through the chat specific before we open things up. How about projects on tribal lands and eligibility for SRF, either directly or perhaps indirectly?
There's a half of this that is money that they don't have like state SRF. They get funds through the Indian Health Service. That said, one of the coolest SRF projects was a tribal-led project in California where they were a borrower from the Yukon tribe. I want to say it's the Yukon tribe. They were one of the largest borrowers of the SRF, where they did a massive sort of getting, I don't know what you call it when they have the land they should have had all along, and then did massive amounts of restoration and then paid for the loan out of both carbon credits and sustainable timber harvestry. So we know in every state that tribal communities are eligible borrowers from the SRF. I would say I don't see them terribly represented in a lot of programs, but that could just, again, be, my perception.
I think that's great. And I think it's a good kind of transition point. Let's pull Reg and Kristen in to join us in the fun here. We are still taking questions in the chat, though we have a couple ones queued up for the panel for folks today. So I wanted to just kick off the discussion on managing expectations. Each of you has a pretty interesting perspective to share on how that relates to kind of project preparedness, let's say. T, you spent quite a bit of time kind of walking through, if you had the idea yesterday versus if you have your permits in place, yada, yada. So I just want to talk about maybe what the timeline is for really preparing, whether for a short-term bridge loan or for perhaps a more involved water infrastructure play with an SRF, how you think about managing expectations in the context of project and proposal development.
I will say, of course, depends when it comes to SRF, depends on the state. Some states are, let's say, I don't know if the word fast applies here, but not as fast as we would want it to be. Thank you, Kelly. It's the Yurok tribe. I'm so sorry. I knew I messed that up. The way I think we need to start thinking about the projects that we do is water infrastructure takes time. You're never going to have somebody that yesterday was like, I think I should do a CSO tunnel. Where's that money for the CSO tunnel? And so I think incorporating nature-based solutions into a lot of our community design work, and I'm not just talking about rain gardens, I'm talking also upstream, restoration and floodplain reconnection, et cetera. It is a little bit of a longer timeline, and it's also the opportunity for larger projects. So that's where I'll stop. In Vermont, we have a program that's at about 3 months for you to be able to access money, 0% 1 year deferred, that TPL has tapped into a number of times. But then I talk to, like, I'll call up like Wisconsin, and they're like, cool. Reggie and I talked about a project in Wisconsin where they're like, yeah, get in line. Next July, we'll accept new applications. And so it ends up like sort of killing the soul of that exciting presentation that I just gave.
Well,
Reggie,
and I do think one thing to throw in there is, as kind of the, land and natural resource conservation community starts to lean in a bit for state revolving funds and natural infrastructure, starting to perhaps adapt our timeline and expectations for what's more realistic for actual water infrastructure, solutions and needs. I know some of these projects might need a little longer to come together. So just really changing a little bit of the timeline for how we think, a real estate transaction can happen like that. And this can be appropriate too for SRF, but also thinking a little ahead on the nature-based solutions front. So Reg, over to you, perhaps.
Yeah, I think from a timing expectation for land and water conservation, let's say it's a mission aligned lender, the expectation could be a few months to a few days, maybe even hopefully someday to a few hours. There are some foundations out there that are making loans, and their decision-making process is, quarterly, or whenever the foundation, committees or boards get together next. Other conservation lenders have a regular schedule. I know Legacy Works, we recently, at the end of last year, it took us 6 days to come up with a $400,000 loan provided by impact investors for a non-refundable deposit on a larger acquisition. So, and when I alluded to hours, there's nothing to preclude a major donor supporter individual person for a land trust. Land trust has a need. Call them up. They could, wire you the funds. Sign a little agreement. That could be a couple of hours. I haven't heard of that being done, but that doesn't mean it hasn't happened. And you've done it. Nice. Would love to see more of it happen in the future. So Kristen, you've done it in a matter of hours. Kudos.
Not hours. No, Actually, that was our first foray into loans, was using $100,000 from 6 abutters each to buy a property for $600,000, and the agreements were 2 pages long. It probably came together in a month or less, a couple of weeks maybe. So it was tricky. I wouldn't do it like that all the time. I prefer one lender. But to answer your question about preparing for loans, I think it just changes the way we think about what is possible. And so, looking at any high priority areas where we know there's a public funding partner, it just increases our appetite for moving ahead in a very proactive way, rather than waiting for that landowner to put the land on the market, or to really just knowing that loans are a tool, we can move forward more quickly, both proactively and in response reactively if something came on the market. So I just always know that it's possible now, and it changes the landscape of what we can do.
It's like the perfect recap of why we put on this session, right? So I wanted to touch on the role for philanthropy and intermediaries in helping to do various kind of market gap support type things. So that can be timing the real estate market, that can be supporting pre-development, We talked in the prep call also about supporting capacity, aka investing in actual human beings to do the work and not just asking the existing, time-strapped, time-poor professionals to figure this all out, like between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. So just want to open that up for some perspectives that each of you see from how you come into this, your vantage point.
I'm happy to start that off. I was just at a large sort of philanthropic brainstorm around climate and water and environmental justice, where a lot of foundations were kind of grappling with this question, which is like, okay, we've done a lot of support for technical assistance. We want to do more with all of this money with nature-based solutions. And I think some of the opportunities that, like the same recommendations that we give in these conversations, which is like, stop talking about your tree project as a tree project only, right? It's also an economic development project. It's also a health project. It's also a stormwater project, so I think in philanthropic world, they can be very siloed and be like, I really only like urban green infrastructure, or like, that's nice, Kristen, but we just do buffers, but not really forested buffers. So I think there's some unsiloing that is an opportunity for philanthropic, and there is just a massive, massive need for a national 0% deferred repayment pre-development loan fund. I'm not talking about like a free grant fund, but pre-development loan fund that we can all access the magical dream that Reggie just said, which is a few days to get money that buys us time to like develop that project so it can then tap into more stable funding and financing long-term. Game changer. And I'm not asking for $1 of free money. Yes. All right. I'm off my pulpit. Reggie, what did I miss?
I think you got it started. Massive opportunities for philanthropy to participate or expand existing participation. So many foundations out there from a national to a state, regional, local scale are already providing program-related investments, i.e. loans from foundations to nonprofits and other causes in their sweet spots or operating regions. I know that it's incredibly powerful when those program-related investments are packaged with sinking dollars, i.e. grants to perhaps expand capacity or improve operations at an organization, or maybe even provide serve as startup money to get the cause, the acquisition, the thing up and running. And that program related investment really is fuel for that catalytic burst. And then, the engine is roaring at that point. So all sorts of opportunities out there. And I think it behooves us all to call up our friendly local foundations and find ways that we can collectively and collaboratively partner and engage them to help bring more dollars to our cause.
Yeah, certainly the moment that we're in, I think it's a big ask of groups to figure this stuff out unless there's dedicated capacity support to do the sleuthing, to have the meetings. That walking around money, even if it's small and partial and just unrestricted funds that you can use to build some of the relationships you need to build to make these partnerships effective.
So I can offer, as a regional land trust with just over 10 staff, we've staffed up to try and take advantage of more opportunities with public funding and with the generational transfer of land. And we are doing more, but the projects have become more complex as well. And so the time for each project is really critical. And so I talked earlier about how borrowing money builds capacity, and that is really through the sophistication of developing more complete budgets that account for all costs, including staff time. And one of my pet peeves is counting staff time as overhead. It is not overhead, it is professional expertise. And so valuing the conservation manager's time on any given project, at least as much as the cost of an appraisal or what you're paying an attorney or a baseline. And I have some smaller land trusts ask, well, how do you track all your time? And does it, and actually some of the federal programs, they are reimbursing time, but you got to like sign with your blood that it's every single hour, and it's very specific. I think we have to move to an opportunity cost framework. When we pay for an appraisal, we don't ask the appraiser how much time they spent, even though they're charging us $5,000 or $10,000. So every project for us is $5,000 at a minimum, and if it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, it's more. And so that's something that is the only way we're going to take advantage of this huge opportunity ahead in the next 10 years, is to have professional staff working on these projects, and philanthropists can play a huge difference in that role.
Well, let's go a cut deeper on this topic, but more specifically in the realm of social and racial equity. So we were talking a little bit about the type of technical assistance required to make sure that some of the available dollars, let's say, for example, in this SRF opportunity, that they actually land in the communities that need them most, historically underserved and kind of otherwise defined under Justice 40. So T, I just wanted to tee you up. I'm so sorry. It's irresistible.
It's the first time anyone's ever done that.
I know. My name's an adverb, so there you go. But just so some of what you're seeing states do with the technical assistance dollars.
The reality is not much. So the states are, so EPA is doing a lot to stand up these environmental finance centers. There are 4 national ones. So EPA is investing like $150 million to sort of ramp those up. I think states are a little bit slower to this opportunity, not because they don't care about equity or justice, environmental justice issues, but I think they are A, very woefully understaffed, and B, also really waiting for EPA to sort of set that model of environmental justice, technical assistance type of work. I think that there is a massive opportunity for the us that are on these phones to get better at talking about some of our projects to the SRFs, and really, I think there's like a, what do you do with the needle? You thread it. I think there's like a bullseye somewhere of this Venn diagram of previously under-resourced communities, particularly redline communities, the lack of nature-based solutions, and really the lack of good, clean water, fishable, swimmable, drinkable water. So the work that we all do is just like a no-brainer. So like, I don't want to say check that box, but really to fit into that definition of, a Justice 40 type of investment. So I think that's a real opportunity for us as states are queuing this up.
Reg, with a hand raised, very formally. You are on mute, sir.
Sorry, thank you. Just trying to be polite and quiet. Along those lines, Lee, and this is, I think, another role for philanthropy, but also fellow lenders, revolving funds out there, is to shift, the paradigm and the analysis and everything behind evaluating who makes a good borrower, what's a good project to finance. There are so many high performance, all volunteer groups out there, very little money in their checking account, representing or operating in marginalized communities that have amazing opportunities that need financing. However, traditional financial models and institutions are going to look at them and not, they aren't credit worthy because they don't fit in the black and white boxes of the financial world. And so I challenge my fellow lenders out there to think differently and take a hard look at how you evaluate your financing opportunities, because there are a lot of missed opportunities, and it is just an absolute shame, and it's heartbreaking. And so think about impact first, returns second, if you can, or if your regulatory framework will allow you to.
Certainly lawyers who are on those lending committees, and others making those calls need to really have some historic and community oriented and impact oriented context when they're due diligencing, a historically underserved group's loan application versus a historically privileged group's loan application. So we're at time here. I'm going to end. Nicholas, thank you for submitting a question that I'd like to pivot into the ender here. So really thinking for each of the panelists to share, is there maybe one project model, maybe two, that you've seen in adaptation, mitigation, or kind of resilience focus that is particularly exciting or something to watch?
I can say there are kind of like a couple that we are having decent success with. Let's say we're on like the third date negotiating with a couple of SRFs. So really trees. I mean, it's the moment. Like if you're a tree person, it's now, right? Figure out where your drinking water source protection areas are, and the reforesting those areas, or doing conservation and restoration work. So we're doing a lot of reforestation work through one of our colleagues has a reforestation initiative through doing this type of work on abandoned mine land through Appalachia. So massive opportunities if you're a tree person, not a hard connection to make. And then I think in Western water, I don't know where the universe of folks sit, but in terms of Western water, we are doing a lot of work with the Freshwater Trust, looking at really like those, agriculture has all the water rights upstream, and how do we make their water needs less through efficiency and then sell those downstream. So I think those mechanisms of water conservation here alleviates a municipal stress down here. We're finding a lot of very sort of easy inroad conversations.
Excellent, T. Over to you, Kristen.
Well, we've used the Forest Legacy program with the theme of Forests of Fawcett several times now, and that has, I think, made a big difference. Has really gotten me thinking about this SRF program and how it could pair with Forest Legacy, but also how it could pair with carbon credit sales. And is that a way to pay back loans by selling the carbon? And even if you consider the mature forests also as a means to sequester or maximum amount of carbon in the storage capacity of the mature trees, I think there's a nice synergy there between watersheds and wildness and biodiversity. So I'm going to explore that.
Absolutely. Reg, over to you.
Yeah, super excited about exploring new ways to mobilize individuals, in particular impact investors, to come into and participate in local conservation, and exploring with them opportunities to not only provide financing to conservation groups to help conserve natural resources, but also explore opportunities to providing financing to private entities, the farmers, ranchers, to keep those natural resources in production.
Thank you. And to all of our panelists for sharing their time and talents this afternoon. Also to everyone who's stuck around to the end here, hopefully not a bitter one. So we are concluding today's session and queuing up the next one. Hope to see everyone March 14th for what should be a fairly entertaining session on approaching companies for partnerships, including a nifty Mad Libs exercise to help folks hone their pitch. So please join us again on March 14th. Please join us in thanking the panelists from Highstead and the Conservation Finance Network. Also just wishing everyone a happy Valentine's Day and hope today has provided maybe a little extra oomph of confidence in making that call, email, or otherwise outreach to a potential lender or potential partner in conservation. Thanks, folks. Catch you next time.